Welcome to Talking Absolute Worship, where for the next hour and possibly a bit less, we will be talking absolute worship and focusing on Advent4. So well done if you've come here looking for preaching ideas and you still have the opportunity to preach on this Sunday just before Christmas. To help us with ideas and inspire us, we've got a sparkling panel of Christmas-hungry panelists, just desperate to get to Christmas, but we're holding back, and we're talking about Advent4. How can you help us, Rachel, into some preaching themes for this coming week?
Well, I saw that Hebrews was on the list, and I thought that I'd had enough of Hebrews over the last number of weeks, so I read it, but I disregarded it. I'm afraid, if you were looking for something very complicated and Paul-y, not that it was necessarily Paul, I don't think it was actually, was it? But it's all in that kind of convoluted blah that we've grown to love over the last few weeks. So I didn't take any notice of Hebrews. But I noticed that we've got two readings from Luke that actually follow on from each other. So I'm starting at verse 39 and going right through to verse 55. And in that passage, Elizabeth affirms Mary's words that come in the verse sort of before that, which we don't read today. And it also occurred to me we don't get the Annunciation this year, which was quite interesting. But in verse 38, Mary says, "Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." And where in the previous bit, Gabriel has drawn attention to the greatness of the child that is to be coming, in this passage, Elizabeth draws attention to Mary as the mother, and there's an emphasis there on Mary's greatness and on Mary's response. In sort of November time last year, I was on a mini retreat, and it was about Russian icons. And there was an icon. I don't know if you can see this. I'll just hold it up. That's the Annunciation. Mary getting whacked with a thunderbolt or something. In Russian, the word for Annunciation shares the same root as evangelism. So to translate it literally, the Annunciation of Mary is the good newsing of Mary, which I quite liked that idea. And it seems to me that we've made Mary a bit of a weakling, if you like. We almost sort of say her, squeaking yes to God in a bit of a timid way. And the person who led the retreat that I was on last year, she said, "Oh, Mary's the figure who says no to sex and yes to everything else." And she's not necessarily a very helpful feminine role model in the way that we may have sort of interpreted her in the past. And we often see women in the Bible, unconsciously perhaps, as role models only for women. That can be one of the dangers. Or we just praise them for their passivity or their acquiescence or their kind of, tolerance of stuff. It's just really not very helpful at all. But when you read this passage, Mary's none of those things. And she's kind of defiant, and she imagines a world in which justice is enacted properly for people, for all those who are overlooked and oppressed. And I feel like Mary's the kind of woman who's happy to put on her Doc Martens and don the T-shirt and pick up her placard and play her part in making this new world happen. So when Mary says yes to God, it's not this sort of, passive, oh, well, what else can I do? And it's not all very holy, but, it's actually, yes, it's like, come and join the protest, I think. So I'd probably like to go down the protest route with Mary. But then something else I read about Mary also struck a chord. It described Mary as perhaps almost being like the first disciple. Because it said, Mary trusts God and does nothing more or less than is expected of every believer. And Mary makes a space in her life for Jesus and carries him within her. And so I thought I'd really go all out on Mary this week.
You're going big. You're going big on Mary.
Big on Mary.
You'd have definitely distracted me with your Mary the one who said no to sex and yes to everything else? It distracted me with that one now, and I'm trying to think of the opposite of that, which probably wouldn't work. Yeah, Ruth.
Shall I rescue you, Phil?
Rescue me, please.
I think the idea of Mary as the recipient, the first recipient of the good news of Jesus, I find really helpful. And every year more and more, I struggle with the line, "Lo, he abhors not the Virgin's womb," because it's kind of, well, what is abhorrent? That's it, about a womb in general, or a virgin's womb in particular, or it's a nasty line. Which is very woman hating and body hating and all the things that Jesus isn't. So I'm not gonna sing that anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm either going to leave that verse out, and I think it's "O Come All Ye Faithful," isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is kind of a difficult hymn not to sing at all because people will expect to sing it. But maybe we've got to look for an alternative. But in the spirit here again of a positive, Mary to be treated as the first disciple, nothing abhorrent about her at all, but the person who receives the good news of Jesus incarnate into her, we usually say heart. In her case, it was womb, but I guess into her heart too, because she was his mother. So I found that really, really helpful. So yeah, let's big up Mary.
Absolutely. And thank you for drawing that to our attention, because it is a weird and horrible line, isn't it? I'm guessing that the original hymn writer wanted to say something like God acts through an unlikely person, but phrases it in such a hideous way that's lost. God acts through an unknown peasanty type of person, and doesn't act through the Queen of Sheba or whatever in the same way. But there has to be another way of writing that line. But good luck trying to get a congregation to sing an alternative line. I think one good option is just to fold your arms and say, "Nope, not singing that line," and I think that works. And then people say, "Why don't you sing that line? What's wrong with that one?" So, and that's cool. I go with you, Rachel, with Mary. At the risk of being thrown out the yrC, I think in the Reformation we ditched Mary with the bathwater, didn't we? And quite a lot of precious things that were attached to Mariology and the spirituality of the Catholic Church attached through Mary, we just threw out because we dismissed it all as superstitious nonsense. And I think we've lost something precious in that. Yeah, Ruth.
Just because you said we've moved on from John the Baptist, I hope you noticed he sneakily does get into this one too by jumping up and down in response to Mary and Jesus. So John the Baptist just can't get away from him. He's there all the time, drawing attention to Mary and drawing attention to Jesus, which of course is exactly what his job is.
He wasn't jumping up and down. He was just getting ready with his swinging axe movement. He was just practicing swinging that axe. Yeah, Henriette.
What I like, Rachel, is the way you humanize Mary again, because although the Protestants have thrown out Mary with the bathwater, I also do feel that the Catholics sometimes just made her too pious and dehumanized her in a funny way. And that whole idea of, yes, the change the world type of girl really, really attracts me as well. That I more have this image of a Greta Thunberg, like, yes, okay, I'm fine with this. Yes, Gabriel, let's go for it. And then a week later, like, oh, what have I done? So maybe a little bit more of that kind of. I don't believe that it was all piousness, and obviously there was belief and there was deep, deep faith, absolutely. But I cannot imagine that would have continuously be her state of mind for 9 months.
Yeah, no, I love that. In traditional art, Mary looks like a nun, basically, doesn't she? I think it's because of the robes as much as anything else, and their desperation to get these blue robes in. But she kind of looks like a nun, and age-wise, your Greta, I think, is probably spot on. And perfect. You know, sort of back then, unknown young girl with somewhere on the autism spectrum, changing the world because she has something to say. God has used her in an amazing way, dismissed by the powerful men of the world, like, you know, Trump was dismissing her out of hand, wasn't he? And I like that a lot, and I like that analogy. It's really something to play with. Who was Mary? What was she like? So if people could dig up, like we have with Jesus, some images from around the world that didn't show Mary as a pious nun, but as an activist or something, that would, I think, help us make the point. Whether or not she was, I don't know. We don't hear about her with placards, but the Magnificat certainly suggests that, doesn't it? Yeah. Great start, Rachel. Thanks for that. You've set us off in all sorts of directions earlier, none of which sound Christmassy. But that's great, because we're not at Christmas yet. Hold your horses, everyone. Henriette, where are you taking us this week?
Well, I found out helpful what you were saying about Greta Thunberg and Donald Trump, to be honest, because for me that I was drawn to the reading in Micah as well as the Luke reading, and the fact that in Micah's time things were harsh, and there wasn't so much of goodwill or peace on earth. The southern kingdom was about to be invaded by the Assyrians, so there was that fear. And then the people who still lived there were oppressed by their own rulers from Jerusalem, who wanted to take as much as they could to give to the Assyrians to hopefully keep them at bay. And there was all kinds of stuff going on that created not a very happy state of affairs. And I think for many people in our society and in the world today, they may be able to relate to that in some kind of funny way, of these fears of being invaded, of being abused by governments and things like that. And then Micah speaks hope into this situation of despair, and a hope that comes from a completely unexpected place. So, like, not from the Trumps of this world, but from perhaps the sides of the Greta Thunbergs or whoever we want to put in that place. And it comes from the place of Bethlehem, which is, of course, a ridiculous place to come to. It's like saying, well, Saltash, what good can come from Saltash? I have nothing against Saltash. It's just an example. So if you live there, nothing against it. But Micah motivates us to see God at work in these places where we don't expect God to be at work or God to move, and it comes from places where we don't normally look. We look to, or the people at his time looked at Jerusalem. That is where things would happen, but instead he says something will come from Bethlehem. And then, and that of course then links into the New Testament reading of this young girl, of this barren woman who suddenly carry these messages of great hope. I think one of the commentators said there are these two women. One carries the messenger, the other one carries the message. And and they are connected, and they represent that place of utter, well, we didn't expect it to come from that place. So that idea that I may actually get to preaching a sermon on the fourth Sunday of Advent, because the elders of my church have decided that it should stay as a communion Sunday. So it would link in really well, these readings, into, and where do we see God? Where do we find our salvation in this upside down world of God? Well, actually, we find that at the table where we just share simple bread, simple wine, but where we feel that our salvation begins and ends. So yeah.
I like that. Lo, he abhors not the gentlefolk of Saltash.
Don't you dare go into that direction.
That's a replacement for you, Ruth, for your carol. Ruth.
Just, I'm delighted to know you've got communion on Advent4, and I just wanted to offer an idea that Susan Derber used, I think 3 years ago now, where she was talking about the manger as the place of food, and had a communion service where she put the bread in the manger. Now, it didn't half cause a stir.
It's
because people kind of hadn't noticed that there's always a manger at the front at Taunton yrC, and it's usually got a baby in it, even before Christmas. And she took the baby out carefully and wrapped up the bread and put the bread in the manger, and just didn't say anything. And then at the point of communion, took the bread out of the manger and said, well, that Jesus is bread for the world, and even being born in a manger is making the point that he is here to feed us. And this is the last place you expect to find the bread for communion, and the last place you expect Jesus to be. And then there is that bit where you break the bread and say, "This is my body broken for you," and it's like, "Oh right, oh we didn't, oh no, we didn't think of that." So it was hugely powerful. But you might want to decide whether people will be up for that. But it just made that point that you were making, the last place you would expect to look.
Fantastic. Henriette.
Yeah, thank you so much for reminding me of that, because I remember Susan doing it whilst I was at college one Friday morning, but she then did it as a silent communion, so she did not say anything. It was purely the symbols, but it was super, super powerful. And she also then had a bottle of wine with one of those wine openers, when you twist the thing in, the arms come out, and so it became like a figure of the cross, and it really was like, ugh, So thank you for reminding me of that. Sorry, my dogs are going funny. Thank you for.
Dogs are excited.
This mention of wine has set them off. Yep. If Susan's listening, thank you, Susan, via Ruth. Susan told me that she didn't think she was quite creative enough to join this gang. I think that's not true. So if you're listening, Susan, reconsider. We would love to have you as part of the gang. There you go. But thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I've always found the whole idea of having communion on Christmas Eve, I really resisted it when I was a new minister, because I just thought, no, this is too much, and we're just about to celebrate the birth of this baby, and at the moment we're doing that, we're saying that his blood is being shed and we're eating him, and it was too much for me, I think, and I just really couldn't get my head around it, and I thought, no, let's forget that. But absolutely, that's the opposite of forgetting that, isn't it? That's tying the two together. Yeah, Ruth.
Now you've reminded me of actually, it was a Methodist minister who preached once on Christmas Eve at a service I was at, and made the point that at the point of birth, Jesus was choosing death, because there's only one way out for all of us when we're born. There's only one way this story is going to end. And that's, if it's a truly human birth, it's going to have to be a truly human death. And again, it was just, I wasn't expecting that on Christmas Eve. I was expecting a kind of, way, it's Christmas, happy stuff. But it really helps to get to some of that deep stuff of what incarnation really means.
Yeah, and some of us, the experience of Christmas Eve is revellers coming across from the pub after closing time to join in our service, and part of it makes me think, yeah, let's give them something with meat on it, to say, oh, Struth, I wasn't expecting that. We were just expecting a jolly vicar saying Happy Christmas. That's not really what's going on, is it? Yeah, the whole birth and death thing is there in art as well. Maybe going off on a tangent, but maybe this is helpful to preachers to pursue this for a moment. I think Neil has introduced us in previous weeks to Francis de la Tour, another artists who try to say exactly the same thing through their portrayal of Jesus in swaddling clothes, and you think, is that are those grave clothes, or is that swaddling clothes, or that baby looks really waxy? Is the baby dead? And you don't know. It's left open to see. And of course, there's always the things about Jesus with the shadow of the cross and stuff. Henriette's gone. She's coming back. That's cool. Right. So yeah, thank you. You've opened up a rich seam there, Henriette. So you've all switched order on my screen. Now I'm terminally confused about who went when. I think we're heading towards Ruth, aren't we? Yeah, we're heading in Ruth's direction. Ruth, where were you thinking of going?
Yeah, well, now I'm thinking of going exactly down the path that Rachel and Henrietta have just taken us down, because I think that's much, much better. But I got really distracted when I looked at the readings myself, and I kind of thought, oh, the Magnificat, I don't know, what do I want to say about that? And the Hebrews, absolutely, I'm with Rachel. It was just tiptoe quietly away and leave that one there, which left me with the Micah and the Psalm, the Psalm 80. And in both of them, I realised there was talk of shepherds, and then I got really distracted with it is nearly Christmas, and people will be thinking about the shepherds and the kings and all the other bits that we're putting into our Christmas scenes. And I thought, well, here is Micah saying, "He shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord." That's the one who's coming from God. So there is something in Micah of the God's servant being related to a shepherd. And then Psalm 80, "Hear, O shepherd of Israel, leading Joseph like a flock." And then there's lots of really, really bad newsy stuff. And then it ends with, "Restore us, O God of hosts, show the light of your countenance, we shall be saved." So the idea of the servant of God as the shepherd, and the Lord is my shepherd, maybe it shouldn't surprise us. And we remember that David was a shepherd, and so that the whole echoes of shepherds are really good things in the Old Testament, and we shouldn't be surprised that shepherds get involved at the birth. But it's still kind of something that makes me scratch my head about why the shepherds were the first to be told. That the angels went and told the shepherds, obviously according to which particular account you read, but that one's pretty much up there. And what was it? So was it that shepherds would recognise in Jesus one of their own, the shepherd of the people, that Jesus came from the Lord who is my shepherd? Or was it about humility? I think I've preached that myself at different times, that at this most important point of history, if you pull together the two bits of your crib scene, you've got the kings on one side and the shepherds on the other, and you've got the lowest and the highest, and that kind of ties into the Magnificat a little bit. The idea that the mighty are brought low at the manger as they have to stoop to go into the stable. I know it's a bit hackneyed, but I'm sure I've preached it. And the shepherds are brought up, because they're brought in from the fields and they're brought into the warmth of the stable and so on. But then I thought, well, maybe it's just that the shepherds were who were there. The shepherds are the ones who are on night duty. That the angels would have had to go and knock up the good people of Bethlehem to get them to come out and see. And the angels were doing their rejoicey thing, which we were talking about last week. And the shepherds were just the audience who happened to be out in the fields with their flocks at the time. And all of that led me to the kind of, who is this for? Who is this event for? Who is the coming of Christ for? And particularly thinking, who are we excluding? And I think that's where, for me, then there was a link to the Magnificat, to the idea that it's not meant to be business as usual. The birth of Jesus is meant to be the event that turns over things, that brings down the low, that lifts up the humble, and that the stable door is open to whoever will go in and look. And I hadn't got to the end of that thinking, really, of who gets excluded, with the way we tell the story at the moment, and who do we want to include. And I didn't find it, but I know it's out there. Lots of artwork of people doing different collages of a stable scene, and including lots of famous people I've seen people do. Or you do the thing where you replace the shepherds with the bin men, and you replace the kings with MPs, and I thought, well, rather than present people with somebody else's version of that, maybe what I would do in Advent4 is talk about our celebration as a church and our celebrations at home, and think, who are we leaving out, and who are the angels singing to, and maybe they're even starting to respond in some way, and how do we make sure the door is open and the invitation is there, and that everybody, because Jesus is the light of the whole world, so there's nowhere the light doesn't shine. How do we make sure that light shines out? So it was a bit of a challenge for Advent4, and maybe not what people are expecting when they're expecting me to say, go off and have a lovely time. But I kind of got myself all worried about the people who aren't having a lovely time, and how we can make sure, not just going back to Henriette's thing about the gift toy service from last week, not just saying therefore we must give to people, but actually we've got to invite them in, and that's even more challenging.
Thank you, Henriette.
Yes, and what I really like about what you're saying, Ruth, is that, we all know that Advent4 is going to be a difficult Sunday in many churches, because people want to do their nativity plays and stuff. And I feel that what you have just been saying, all that could really quite easily be brought in to a nativity play and to the writing of a nativity, and making use of these texts. I love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you for that.
Rachel.
I was just thinking that this year we've got a bit of a luxury, if you like, in that Advent4 is actually nearly a whole week before Christmas. And sometimes Advent4 is kind of Christmas Eve almost, isn't it? Or it is sometimes Christmas Eve. So on those occasions, it's really hard to remain with a sense of Advent, but I think there's maybe a little bit more chance. I know we've got nativity plays and things to deal with too, but because there is nearly a whole week to go, I think we can maybe just step back a little bit from the headlong rush.
Yeah, I hadn't twigged that. And next year there will be literally a whole week, won't there? Because it'll be because Christmas Day is a Sunday, which is like a major result for preachers. Christmas Day is a Sunday. How cool is that? I'm afraid you sent me off down a bit of a rabbit hole, Ruth. I tried to listen to everything else you said, but when you were talking about the shepherds, I thought it was such a powerful idea that maybe the shepherds, it's just because they were there, and it made me think of a post that's being developed here in Cambridge, which is a special category ministry post trying to relate to the nighttime economy. And as you said that, I started thinking, because when you look at a city at nighttime, at this inhospitable time when Jesus was born, who would have been around but shepherds who had to be around when the angel? Everybody else was safely tucked up in their nice little houses, and it made me wonder how we make those connections. I've done the bin men thing with the shepherds too, and it does sometimes make people think. But there could be a whole thing that you tried to connect to your community about who those people are who are around at inhospitable hours, doing inhospitable things around the town that nobody ever notices, but they would be there at these times when a ragged family from out in a village show up wanting somewhere to stay. It might be the person in the garage, the 24-hour garage, because they turn up at the shop and they need something to eat. And there are pictures of nativities at petrol stations, aren't there? I've seen them anyway, where they turn up at a petrol station because that's the only place that's open. You've sent me off down that rabbit hole now to think that through, and I think, as Rachel was saying, all of that could and has been, I'm sure, a script for a nativity service, and not just as simple as let's just convert the characters into their modern day equivalents, because sometimes you think, yeah, well, that's a nice idea, but it doesn't go very far, does it? Just to say the shepherds are the bin men. I don't know who the angels are, because that's always the most difficult one, isn't it? They're the nurses. They're the angels. And I end up thinking about, but there is a big and, isn't there, to that, which I think you've helped us think through. So thank you for that. Whether that comes out as a sermon or as a nativity, we'd still be preaching whichever you did, wouldn't we? I have to confess to being completely confused that my Zoom screen pictures have all changed around. I have been around everyone, haven't I? Yeah, because it only takes one simple change and I'm totally lost. Just Henriette and Rachel swap places for a second. I can't get them back. So we're back in the zone. There are other things to do on Advent4 that we might be persuaded to do with these readings that will help us bring out some of the points, maybe more powerfully sometimes than preaching can. So, where am I? I'm going to go Henriette. I'm still
Rachel
confused.
was the one who went first, actually.
Is she? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so confused.
I mean, I don't mind, but I mean,
No,
really,
no,
Rachel was the first one.
Rachel's champing at the bit. So let's go with Rachel. Rachel, what have you come
Okay,
up
I'm
with?
just going to stand up one moment and grab a
Oh.
book off the shelf that I forgot to get out before. So I had some questions that I was thinking about to start with that we could discuss. But it kind of links back more into the perhaps more into the Annunciation side of things. What was it that I said yes to in the beginning? And what do I need to say no to today? Might be a good question.
Yep.
And the image of Mary kind of in the icon, Mary doing her spinning when the angel interrupts her. I'm just thinking, what has challenged me or brought good news to me in the middle of doing just something else. So I thought if I wanted people to explore some questions that weren't explicitly Christmassy questions, those would be the ones I'd choose. I was in a service a few years ago and the leader used a version of the Magnificat that had actions, and I haven't managed to find it, but he read out a line of the, it was a paraphrase of the Magnificat, and then we had to do all kinds of actions like, we were mighty or we were hungry or, all sorts of things. And there was a lot of standing up and sitting down and turning around and things. So maybe there's a way to use that as a prayer that could be a whole body kind of prayer, get people moving. I'd like to sing the Angel Gabriel, the Basque carol, because we hardly ever sing that, and I like to choose it at least once a year. But the book I was getting down is called The Book of Mary by Nicholas Lee, and that is just a perfect book in my mind, because it's got chapters, it's got sections. There's a section called In Praise of Mary's Hairy Armpits. Mary breaks bread. Mary says no. There's all sorts of brilliant prayers and poems and thoughts about Mary in that book. And another book that is a bit more broadly Christmassy, so it's called A Star-Filled Grace by Rachel Mann, and there's some really good Mary stuff in there as well, but also wider poems and reflections on the season. So I'd recommend both of those books.
Fabulous, thank you. I'm struggling not to go down any hairy armpit rabbit holes.
Poor Phil.
Rabbit holes to start with, but you're all setting me off this week down rabbit holes I don't want to go down. So thank you, Rachel. Henriette, what have you got for us?
Not a lot. Well, not a lot, but a lot. Especially, I was thinking, because it is a communion service for me on that Sunday, I actually did decide that was enough symbolism. I also have the carol service in the evening. And I think sometimes with Christmas, it can just become too much of a sensory overload, which we already get in the shops and everywhere around us in the first place. And so especially now that Ruth has reminded me of Susan's way of doing communion, I definitely will go with that. And I think that would be plentiful in that service. But my gathering question for the fourth Sunday of Advent would be, where in the world this week did you find God in unexpected places? So I would use that. But other than that, sorry, this is a little bit maybe self-centered to just think about my service, but I think it would be amazing to do that kind of communion. I think it would be hopefully a real blessing to people. So I'll stick with that for now.
No apology needed, Henriette. That's the whole point of what we're doing. We talk about what we do, and other people can sort out what they do. And if that's not our job. So we talk about what we're going to do because it's a real live thing that we're producing and preparing for. That's the whole point. So, and I think you've brought to us very powerfully the idea of how to do communion. How to think about doing communion, because it wasn't on my mind before we started this conversation, and now it is. So thank you, to you and Ruth, for introducing that to us. Ruth, what have you got?
I started to think about the Magnificat, and we often use the dum tum 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 in a very sort of martial kind of let's all get behind the Magnificat sort of way. And I thought it might be nice to think about Magnificat as the song of one voice, it kind of in the silence. I mean, just the voice of Mary, and just sort of to try and simplify it back down again and get people to hear that. But I like your Greta Thunberg, because it's saying that the one voice still has power. And I found this version, which I'm going to play you at least part of when I've pressed all the right buttons. And it's there's something about it I really don't like. And I think it's that it's in a very ornate church. So it's a very holy kind of Magnificat. And I really wanted something simpler than that. But maybe just the contrast. It starts with the ornate church, and then it goes to this very simply dressed but very beautifully singing solo voice. And I'll just play a bit and see what it does for you, that kind of contrast idea. It's the contrast I want to bring out, really. So I'm pressing all, I hope, the right. I'm sharing the sound because I'm clever. I'm not sharing the desktop because we don't want that.
I'm liking the guided commentary. Yeah.
Yeah, I can only do it if I talk about it as well.
My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Saviour, for he has looked with favor on his lowly servant. From this day, all generations will call me blessed. The Almighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. He has mercy on those who fear him in every generation. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud in their conceit. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly.
I don't want to stop it because it's just musically, it is beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful.
But there is something, isn't there? I mean, I don't think it's me, but there is something a bit, but I want something gritty. I want the Magnificat to be more gritty than that. So I think if I used that, I would want people to kind of feel some of it's a beautiful acoustic in that church, but the shots of the ornate church kind of didn't jarred a bit with the message of the words. But the beauty of her voice, I just think. So maybe one way you could get around that is simply to use it as an audio. and don't show people the video. Don't let them get distracted, or to use it as a point of. And the fact that she's blonde is really concerning, which is not her fault, obviously. Because as you were talking earlier about, a strong Mary, made me think of the one in the Lady Chapel in Ely Cathedral, and Phil is the one who now lives nearest to that and can toddle along to see it, and it's the one that's known as the Charlie Dimmock.
Yeah.
Because it's a really beefy Mary, and it's brilliant. The strength of it is great, but she's got this really blonde hair, and always when I see it, I kind of I just want to go and colour her in, a different, and make her look, more as Mary would have been. But I love the strength of it. So there's something about the helping people get to what is it that jars and contrasts. And then I got a bit poncy with it and thought, and within the Magnificat itself, there is that same jar and contrast. So it's, what's happening to the ones who are considered the top are brought down, and the ones who are considered low are lifted up. And it's all this sort of overturning of our expectations. So you could be very poncy and say that you're choosing the video precisely because it overturns some of the expectations. Or you could just use the audio and say, isn't that a beautiful voice? And aren't they amazing words? And then get people to make their placards of what they really want to protest about and get them shouting the words of the Magnificat.
Yeah, fantastic. I think I wrote something hideously rude about Mary Dimmock when I visited Ely on a sabbatical I did a few years ago, because it is quite something. As a middle child would say, when she doesn't want to reveal exactly what she thinks. But yeah, you could use the miracle of modern technology and put different imagery behind the audio of placard waving Thunbergs. Could you not? Or
no, I couldn't. But it's a good idea.
No, I couldn't. Yeah, you could think about doing that and then get someone else to do that for you. Cool. Yeah, we have gone around different, haven't we? I've got a couple of things. I'm so easily confused. Most of my stuff is imagery this week. I did have a setting of the Magnificat, which I think I won't play because the one that Ruth has just shown us was infinitely better. So I think I'll just show you some pictures of stuff that I was kind of led to a little bit. So how do I do this? Right, there we go. From the beginning. Right. When you type in Mary and Elizabeth into Google, you get Mary Queen of Spots. Mary Queen of Scots. I think Mary Queen of Spots would be a better idea. Mary Queen of Scots and Elizabeth I in there, and there's loads of pictures. And I thought, I wonder. I think there's something to go at in this story of the relationship between Mary and Elizabeth, because that is something that's in this Luke passage, that there is a connection or a relationship between them, and I think here's two other Marys who had a relationship, and I'm just wondering if there's anything in sort of comparing and contrasting the cooperative relationship that Mary and Elizabeth, well, they're both called Mary and Elizabeth as well, funnily enough. So there we go. The biblical Mary and Elizabeth have this kind of cooperative joint venture style of relationship, don't they, where they're mutually happy for one another, whereas these two are a little less happy for one another. It's a more murderous style of relationship going on between these two. Anyway, that's just something to play with if you're interested. But also I want to introduce you to someone called Trey Everett, who has created images for loads of the lectionary readings. Trey's a bloke, and you can look at it at TreyEverettCreates.com. And he has this image. It's a bit like that. Is it a vase or is it or whatever that famous optical illusion is? But this is this a vase or is it two massively pregnant women? With blessed is she who believed that there will be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her. And I just think that I think that's fabulously done somehow. I like graphic art and that's Creative Commons. So you can use that freely. It's a Creative Commons image, so you can share it and use it. And Trey Everett is very generous with his work. So yeah, do look him up, because I think some of his work is fabulous, and I just love the way he's done that. So there's one, and the other ones are all just really images that you might want to play with to get congregations to think. Here's two women by this is by a sculptor called Charles Leply. Again, this is Wikipedia Creative Commons image, so you can use this with attribution. If you say who it's by, you can use that freely. And it's just a picture of two massively pregnant women just having, an encounter such as Mary and Elizabeth would have had. And I don't know, going back to Ruth's abhors the Virgin's womb, I think sometimes we abhor images of massively pregnant women. It's kind of seen as faintly embarrassing, isn't it? And I mean, even by women who buy giant baggy clothes to try and cover it up. Oh, am I showing? Oh, I look huge. I look like I look like a bus. You hear people say all the time, don't you? And actually, no. These images seem to suggest no. We're entirely comfortable with this. This is a fruitful thing. I've never been pregnant, so I'm being fanciful here. Maybe it is really horrible. But anyway, these two look incredibly relaxed with the idea, and they're talking about their hopes. I assume they're talking about their hopes and their fears about what this means for them. Everything is going to change. I had a fanciful idea. Maybe as women you can put me right on this. Whether there is any mileage at all in finding some kind of connection that the church has, or that you have, or that you know about in the community, that could take the church somehow into the life of a maternity ward, and maybe bring an interview or a couple of interviews with some of the soon-to-be mothers in a maternity ward who'd be happy to talk about their hopes and dreams and what this means to them. Like Mary and Elizabeth were having this "we're pregnant ladies together" conversation, and I'm sure they'd talk more about what this meant for them. And I liked, I think it was Rachel, maybe it was Henriette, contrasted their conditions. Sort of Elizabeth's at one end of the spectrum, never expecting to have a baby again, and maybe Mary's at the other end, not expecting to have one so young, or at this stage in her life, and they're both sort of at the different ends of the maternity ward, aren't they? So yeah, I thought that was worth having a look at least. What have I got next? I've forgotten now. Oh yeah, I don't know what you feel about this one. Raphael Sanzio does this sort of technique of it is not normally called, you don't normally have the Sanzio, but it's just usually called Raphael. He is the famous Raphael painter. He does this thing of this, are they coming out of the picture thing, and there's John and Jesus encountering one another as if from the womb, but not. And poor old Elizabeth looks like she's about 124, doesn't she? And there's a bit of a Mary Dimmock there. There we are. So there's another one. And then I quite like having images from around the world. This one is by James Youngknecht. Maybe Henriette can help us with that one. I don't know.
Youngknecht.
There you go. I don't know exactly where he's from, but you can find his stuff at www.bcartfarm for some reason. bcartfarm.com. He does lots of prints and stuff. I just love the way we've got the Joseph and Zachariah in the background of that image. And just so we know which is which, Joseph is holding some tools and he's got a flat cap on, and Zachariah is holding a sign saying, "His name is John." And they've got little sort of pictures on there of what their children will become. I just think that's just lovely to sit and look at and imagine what's going on in the artist's head here, and I like the style of it. There's tons of stuff out there, and of course you can always turn to Hei Qi, a really well-renowned Chinese artist who's been honoured around the world. Just got an honorary doctorate, I think, recently from somewhere. And yeah, he's done more than one image of this encounter, but I particularly like this one, largely because of the colours. Maybe a bit of a surface reason for liking it, but I like the colours in there and what's going on between these two women, and that Elizabeth isn't represented as like 140 years old. maybe just slightly older than she'd expect to be pregnant. I think that's probably all that I had, which is, it's unlike me, just a load of images. But I like the idea. I'm not quite sure how I'd pursue it, but I like the idea of thinking about the image of pregnant women talking to each other, because their conversation is going to be overlaid with hopes and fears about what the future might bring, the immediate future and the long-term future. And then, of course, it gives you access to the Magnificat, because Mary tells us about her hopes for the future. Maybe gives us access to Zachariah's song as well, if you use the image with him in the background about his hopes for John. Elizabeth, we don't hear really that much about what her hopes are, other than, wow, didn't expect to be having a baby at this age. Yeah, that's what I've got. There's lots of stuff to play with on this Sunday, which it'd be a shame to miss out because we're thinking too hard about Christmas. Has anyone else got anything that's occurred to them as we've showed pictures and stuffs? Ruth?
Just from what you were saying, Phil, it seems like Advent4 could be a pregnant pause before Christmas.
There we go. You could put that as your church banner outside. Come on Sunday for a pregnant pause and a digested biscuit. Yep. Fantastic. Right. So we have been talking absolute worship for about an hour. We've been fairly disciplined, and we recognise how difficult it is at Christmas, but yet also I hope what a huge joyful privilege it is to be leading worship at this time. So to encourage us and help us as we set about the task, even at this late stage of preparing our Christmas services, and particularly this one for Advent4, Rachel's going to lead us in prayer. No, she's not.
Ruth is.
Ruth is going to lead us. I just told you I was easily confused. People have swapped around and I have no idea where we are. Ruth is going to lead us in prayer.
God, as we magnify and praise your name, as our spirits rejoice in you, our Saviour, we ask you to look with favour on the lowliness of your servants. Look with favour on our preparation of worship of you. Look with favour on all of our ministries, and use the gifts we offer to bring good news to the world. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.